Welcome everybody tuning in. This is SEC Mafia, a football podcast where we talk all things SEC football. You see our X handle right there. Give us a like and a follow on X. We will have a YouTube page up and running shortly after this episode. Go like and subscribe us and get our views up. We're just going to kick it off. No, it's mid-season, but we still got a long season ahead of us of SEC matchups and SEC football. I am Tyler from T-Town. Live in Tuscaloosa. We have Randy from Mobile, who is going to be our co-host for the remainder of the podcast for the foreseeable future. Yeah, kick us off, Randy. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for tuning in, guys. First and foremost, I am a professional football watcher. Love to watch football. Why not get on here and talk about it, right? So we're going to be dropping podcast probably on Tuesday mornings, weekly, all the way through the national championship game. After that, we'll probably do one a month, maybe like in February to recap recruiting, and then March, April, May, and kind of recap the spring games for all schools. And then once we get into the summer months of next year, we'll start getting ready for next season's previews. But, as Tyler said, we still have a lot of football left, even though there are 2 weeks left in the regular season. With the expanded playoffs now, that gives us an extra 3 weeks of meaningful football over the Christmas holidays. So we're excited to be here. So yeah, let's jump right into it, Tyler.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So like you said, we have so much more football to be played, and I know the previous rankings that came out this past week, this past Tuesday night, they are up on the screen for you for those of you watching on YouTube. With Oregon taking the number 1 seed and the number 1 rank, Texas in the 2nd seed spot at a number 3 rank. With the ACC nod going to Miami at the 3 seed, and then Boise actually jumping in with the new rankings as a first-round bye after BYU losing to Kansas last week, tumbling to 14 in the rankings. It's kind of crazy seeing Boise State hop so far up. Well, they didn't necessarily hop up in the rankings, but Boise State with a first-round bye. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean they're the 4th. As of right now, projected conference champion, and they are ranked higher than the Big 12 leader, who would be projected to be the conference champion in BYU. So technically, you've got Boise State would be getting that 4th spot.
Yes.
I don't necessarily agree with that, and I know games are played on the field. And again, this is an SEC podcast. Tyler and I, we are Bama fans. We grew up Alabama fans. We're not going to sit here and just sing Alabama's praises. We're going to be neutral in this and just talk all things ball as far as SEC goes. But one thing that really sticks out to me is you can get projections right now as if these games were going to be played. And it's kind of ironic. Ole Miss would be going to Indiana, Georgia would be going to Penn State, Alabama would be going to Notre Dame, and all 3 of the SEC schools on the road would be favored in their first round matchups. That just speaks exactly volumes to the strength of the conference. And exactly why I believe, the SEC is the powerhouse conference.
And so, like you said, we are Bama fans, but growing up, we mainly focus on SEC sports and anything SEC related, just because, we, like you said, we believe it is the superior conference, and logically and statistically it is. If we take a look at the strength of schedule, which is now on the screen, you see that comparatively to the Big Ten, and you'll see it. We'll compare everything to the Big Ten, because that's the two. Figuratively, that's the 2 powerhouses in Power 4 college football is SEC, Big Ten, and that's where a lot of the comparisons go. But if you look at the SEC's cumulative strength of schedule, you have Texas at 38, Alabama is 16th, Ole Miss 29, Georgia has the number 1 overall strength of schedule, Tennessee 17, Texas A&M 24, South Carolina 8th, and Mizzou 21st. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams from the SEC that are in the top 25 with a top 25 strength of schedule. With the exception being from Texas. But the cumulative average of all those teams, of all 8 teams that are from the SEC, is an average strength of schedule of 19. So let's flip that and look at the Big Ten. Big Ten strength of schedule, you have 5 teams right now from the Big Ten ranked in the top 25. You have Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana, and Illinois, with Ohio State's strength of schedule being 28. Oregon's is 43rd, Penn State 35. Indiana is 106th. And Illinois is actually in the top 25, them being the only team in the top 25 for a strength of schedule rank. Their cumulative average of strength of schedule is only 47. So that alone right there just tells you the level of competition between the two conferences and the strength of schedule that each team has to play week in and week out is just light years ahead of any other conference.
Right, and not to mention next week when Texas and Texas A&M play, that's only going to help Texas's strength of schedule. And something else that sticks out, like you say, is there's 7 SEC teams on this list. There's 8 SEC teams that's ranked right now, and just going back throughout my lifetime, I can sit here and just off the top of my head tell you that Tennessee won a national title in 1998. Florida's won multiple national titles for the Tebow era. Of course, Alabama's had the success that they've had. Georgia's come on and won 2 national titles. Auburn's won a national title in 2010. LSU's won 3 national titles, the last one being 2019. So it's not just a one-trick pony in the SEC like you see in some of these other conferences. When I was young, Florida State dominated the ACC. It was only Florida State. That was the only school from that conference. Kind of Miami was the same way in the old Big East. Um, for the past previous years, you've had Texas and Oklahoma in the Big 12. In the Big 10, it was Ohio State forever. Of course, Michigan, they did win one last year, but they kind of, faded back off. But whenever you look at the landscape of the SEC, it's not just one team. It's not just one big game. It's every single week you're getting the best of the best. And this graphic here proves it, with the strength of schedule rating.
Yeah, and so also another angle to kind of look at that with strength of schedule is you can look at your opponent's win percentage too. And so out of the top 25, the team with the highest opponent win percentage is actually Alabama at 62%. They're 0.622. Coming in second is Georgia at 0.590. I mean, 59%. And then surprisingly, third on the list is Boise State. There in the Mountain West. But then fourth spot, you have Ole Miss. So out of the top four, you have 3 from the SEC with their opponent's win percentage being over 500. And to no avail and no surprise, the lowest on this list is actually Indiana coming in at 0.38. And that's one thing that I wanted to touch on is their strength of schedule is 106. Their opponent win percentage is well below the 500 level. And this weekend, they have a chance to either show that they're a pretender or show that they're a contender with traveling to Ohio State. And this may be their only shot this entire year. And we'll go into an unpopular opinion that I have in just a second. But I mean, what are your thoughts with how the committee is? No, I'm not going to say catering to Indiana, but how week in and week out perspectives are being shifted around for different teams.
Well, the committee has taken such a knee-jerk, quick reaction approach every single week. And I've heard this comment made some this week, and I don't necessarily agree with this. I've heard so many people say, that the committee made the precedent last week with the BYU getting beat by Kansas for BYU to drop completely out of the rankings right now or drop out of the top 12 all the way down to 14. And so if Indiana gets beat by Ohio State, they're probably going to drop out. You also have to take into consideration who BYU lost to in losing to a 3-6 Kansas. Okay, so yeah, they deserve to just plummet out of the rankings. Indiana is going on the road to Ohio State. I will say this: if they do get blown out in the only big time matchup they've got, yeah, they should be nowhere near the top 12. Looking at Boise, I have no problem with Boise if the committee wanted to rank them ahead of Indiana or around where Penn State is, because at least Boise does have the early season matchup where they played Oregon on the road and went toe to toe with Oregon. To me,
That's exactly
even though
right.
Boise State lost that game, that's more impressive than anything that Indiana has done up to this point.
I'm almost certain, and I know you're not supposed to give credit for wins that were ranked and then they fell out, but I'm almost certain they beat UNLV at UNLV earlier in the season when UNLV was ranked in the AP. So they do have a better strength of schedule than most G5 teams, and Indiana does not. But one thing that you said that is actually interesting to me is, so like we're saying, this is Indiana's big time moment. This is their moment to go out and prove to the whole country and the committee, like we deserve to be in here. There's no doubt, we're the best in the Big Ten. So one thing that I heard this week, and I agree with it, is and there's no hate towards Texas at all. They're a SEC school. You can compare Texas to Indiana in the way that if we're going to hold Indiana to the fire and say, okay, you lose to OSU, which is going to be their best game that is scheduled on their schedule. So you lose that, we're going to keep you out of the CFP. What about Texas? And this is not apples to apples. I understand that it's not on the same level, but you look at Texas's schedule. Now, I get it. The schedule makers for the SEC, you can't help that. You absolutely, and the same for Indiana. You can't help that you play in the lower tier teams in the Big Ten. That's understandable, but you can help your non-conference because you are in direct correlation in scheduling that. And so, if you look at Texas's non-conference, they've got Colorado State, University of Texas at San Antonio, La Monroe, and Michigan. And we see how the Michigan win has fared out for them. Their best SEC win is a Vanderbilt. And I know Vandy is mid-tier this year. They're going bowling for the first time since 2018. But still, they played their Ohio State in Georgia towards the middle of the year at home and lost by 2 scores, and that was their best game. And then you look around at the rest of their schedule, there's not enough meat there. And it's the same for Indiana. And I get it. You're giving Texas the nod for being tied for first in the SEC, and so I understand that. But if we're going to hold teams accountable, like we're saying for Indiana, if you lose bad enough at Ohio State, you're out. Look at Texas too. And again, there's no hate towards Texas, but that's just the inconsistencies here. But it also shows that teams in the SEC are more prone to get a nod, which is good because the level of competition. And I'm not comparing, Arkansas or Mississippi State or any of those teams in comparison, because I believe Mississippi State and Arkansas is better than any opponent that Indiana's faced.
Yeah, I wouldn't stretch it that far. Michigan is still pretty talented. I will say this about Texas: whenever you look at what they did to Michigan and how they just completely, handled Michigan throughout the entire game. I mean, it was pretty evident that game was over going into the second quarter, especially by halftime. And so what they did to Michigan has been more impressive than what, several of the teams in the Big Ten that have beaten them have done, much less Indiana, who won 20-15 versus Michigan and really could have lost the football game. But I do agree with what you said about Texas. Texas had their big game against Georgia, lost by 2 scores. They've got another one coming up with Texas A&M. If they lose that game to Texas A&M, then I do not believe that they deserve to make the college football playoffs, because at that point, what is their big win? At that point, Their biggest win is going to probably be, a 6-6 Michigan, or maybe a 7-5 Vanderbilt, 6-6, 7-5 Arkansas. They're not going to have that marquee win. And I know a lot of people may be hearing us talk about Vanderbilt saying, well, Alabama lost to Vanderbilt. Yes, they did lose to Vanderbilt, but they also went into Death Valley, destroyed LSU, beat Georgia, beat South Carolina, who's the hottest team in the country right now, shut Missouri out. So there are other things on their resume that kind of nullifies that. Texas doesn't have that. They don't have anything on their resume to nullify getting blown out at home by Georgia. Now, they've got Texas A&M coming up, just like Indiana's got Ohio State coming up. Here's their chance to silence the critics. Here's their chance to say, hey, we do belong. Give us our rightful spot in this thing.
That's exactly right. And so with that, typically every week we're going to cover SEC matchups, and strictly, we're going to try to stick to that unless there's some major game that, we want to talk about. But typically we're going to cover we're going to try, to get into detail for at least, 3 to 4 every week. But we're at least going to touch on each one of these games every week for the remainder of the season on into bowl season, and into next year when we continue on. So on the screen,
and it'll be easier, when we're in the meat of the SEC schedule and you're looking at 16 teams, everybody's playing SEC games. There won't be as many. The last couple of weeks, you've got some non-conference matchups with Florida State, Florida, Georgia Tech, Georgia, and then this week you've got some people playing their kind of, D2 warm-up game. So there are a few more games on the slate. But with that being said, some of these games like UMass and Georgia, like Tennessee and UTEP, Wofford, South Carolina, we're not going to spend very much time on those games. So, this being the first episode, if you are a South Carolina, Tennessee, or Georgia fan, we're not hating on you guys. I just really don't think there's much to say about those games. Just as long as you don't go out and lose them, because if you go out and lose those games, we're going to have plenty to say next week.
Oh, that's exactly right. So with that, our Mafia matchup number one, Ole Miss at Florida, 11 a.m. kick in the Swamp. I believe we talked, and the line is set at, what'd you say, 11 and a half?
Yep, the line is set for Ole Miss 11 and a half. The
11 and a
over is
half.
at 55.
Yep. Um, yeah, I really would love to give a lean towards Florida in this, being a home game. I just think that Ole Miss's rushing defense. If Florida, let's just put it this way: if Florida is going to have a chance, and they've been playing some pretty decent ball, they just beat LSU last week, and they went toe to toe with Tennessee a couple weeks ago. I think with Ole Miss's passing defense at only being 13th in the SEC, they usually give up about 229 yards a game, and Florida averages 231 yards a game. So you're really going to have to lean on DJ Lagway in this game to make plays.
Yeah, absolutely. And my thing is with like you said, the one comparison that I've got for this game is Texas, and you look how Texas just completely annihilated Florida. Now I know that DJ Lagway did not play in that game, but he also doesn't play defense. Florida's secondary has been very banged up, and then something to make note about as well for Ole Miss. Um, Trayon Harris is back this week. So they're going
Mm-hmm.
to have their full assortment of weapons. He is one of the most dynamic electric wide receivers in the country. He was actually leading the country, in receiving up until his injury. So that just opens up the door even more for Ole Miss's offense to be more explosive in the downfield passing game. And one thing that would be a concern to me if I was a Florida fan is I know the last time we saw Florida, they got a huge win over LSU, but LSU controlled the clock for almost 45 minutes in that game. I think the time of possession was around 41 and some change to 18 and some change. Yes, Ole Miss is dynamic. Yes, they can air it out. Jackson Dart can make plays with his legs. They've got a pretty good running game. So if they can control that clock, keep DJ Lagway off the field, and then start hitting some passes over the top, I just don't see where Florida has much of a chance in this game. In any of these games like that, when you're looking at a two-score underdog, the path for victory is always turnovers. You know,
Mm-hmm.
does Ole Miss turn the ball over early? Florida, take a 10, 14-point lead in the Swamp, get the crowd into it. Okay, now we've got a recipe for an upset. Outside of that, I just don't see a path to Florida winning this football game.
No, and like you said, with their offense, they have the second best offense behind Miami technically in the FBS. They're averaging 539 yards a game and 7.8 yards a play. That is a huge number. Jackson Dart has over 3,400 passing yards, only behind Kyle McCord and Cam Ward this year. I just don't see a path to where Ole Miss just doesn't go in there and handle their own and take care of business on the road. Yeah, I mean, you got to go with Florida in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm doing a score prediction on this one, I'm gonna say probably 34-17 Ole Miss. I think that Walter Nolan and that Ole Miss defensive line is good enough to limit Florida. I do think DJ Lagway is good. They're going to make some plays. He is going to put a few points on the board. But if I'm just looking at this as both teams playing, their B plus A minus game playing pretty good like they're supposed to, I just think Ole Miss pulls away and wins by about 17.
Yeah, for me, I'm going 42-10. Like you said, Walter Nolan and that defensive line is there. I think that they're going to get pressure on Lagway. Yes, he can shift around in the pocket. Yes, he can make some plays with his feet. But I just think um, that with that front seven, there's going to be turnovers to be had for Florida, and I think that Ole Miss will capitalize on that. And I'm going 42-10.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to quickly move on to our next matchup. Mafia matchup number 2, UMass at Georgia. Not going to spend too much time on this. Probably just going to do a score prediction for this one. So, what are you thinking on the score prediction for this?
Yeah, just a quick note about this one. Is Carson Beck back? Who is Carson Beck? Will the real Carson Beck please stand up? One week we're getting the guy that's turning the ball over 3, 4, 5 times. The next week we're getting the guy that looks like the projected first round draft pick that he was supposed to be at the beginning of the season. Fortunately for him, this is their chance to continue to build off the momentum of the Tennessee win last week with UMass coming in here, uh, over with by halftime. Here's a chance for them to get right, get their guys some rest, get their backup some playing time. I'm going to say 56-7 Georgia.
Yeah, I'm leaning on that as well. I said 54-3 Georgia. Um, you know, like you said, is Carson Beck back? I would really like to see. This could be a very good confidence booster for the rushing attack for Georgia. We could see them try to stretch some new things, get the run game involved. We haven't really seen a dude for them per se in the backfield. So I think this could be a good confidence game for them. Try to extend out, not put too much on film, for the next coming weeks, but stretch it out a little bit, get the run game going. Good confidence booster week for Georgia.
Yeah,
Next
absolutely.
Mafia matchup number 3. We're gonna say a few things. This is gonna be one of our quicker analysis. I'm going 52-7 Tennessee. I think that when you have a rusher like Dylan Sampson in the background who is leading the SEC with rushing TDs and rushing yards, I think he's just going to have a massive game. With Nico kind of being banged up the last couple of weeks, I think this allows him, not to sit out, not to do anything like that, but I think this allows him to take a step back, let Dylan Sampson, pad his stats a little bit, and I just think Tennessee controls everything in this game.
Yeah, I'm with you. You go back to the early season Tennessee when they were playing Kent State and putting up, 70 points, kicking onside kicks up by 35 in the first half. I think you see more of that with this. Um, I agree with what you said about making sure, that Nico gets some rest and he gets fully healthy for a potential playoff run down the stretch. But part of me also thinks that they've really struggled in the downfield passing game. So I think while they will try to get Nico out of this thing early second half and get him some rest, I do believe in the first half they're going to try to take some of those vertical shots to get that passing game going the way it was early on in the season. And that really opens the door for a major blowout. I'm going to say Tennessee 63-7.
Dang.
I mean, UTEP's 2-8. They're 40-point
Massive.
underdogs. I think Tennessee is going to be, coming off of a loss next week. They know their back's against the wall. They're going to be focused. They're going to be, in playoff mode. Every game's a playoff going forward for them. Every game's a playoff game. And against UTEP, they can't afford to have a 28-17 game where they just look lethargic and win like that. At this point in the season, style points are going to matter. Tennessee is one of the first couple teams out. They're going to be trying to make their case. If we end up with a 6-2 conference record logjam in the SEC, somebody could get left out of the playoffs, and everybody's going to be trying to make their case. They can't afford to go into this football game right here and just wallow around and let UTEP hang around. They're going to put them away early, 63-7.
Yeah, absolutely. Next Mafia matchup number 4, we got Kentucky at Texas, 2:30. I believe it's on. This is the ABC game at 2:30. The line is set for 20.5 for Texas. So Kentucky's actually on a 1-4 streak in their last 5 games. So not great. And I'm not saying that they're going to come in here and just absolutely shock the world, but I think people are forgetting about earlier in the season, Kentucky played 3 top 10 teams and beat 1. And they only lost the other 2 by a combined 8 points. They beat Ole Miss. They hung around with Tennessee and only lost by 7. And Georgia only beat them by 1 point. So is this the Kentucky team that we are going to see, from the beginning of the season? Or have they laid their heads down? Have they kind of just died off? This season is a wash. I mean, it just depends, For Texas, they struggled with Arkansas last week. I'm actually looking forward to kind of be a close matchup, but obviously given the nod to Texas, Kentucky has the 3rd-ranked passing defense in the SEC, and Texas has the 3rd-ranked passing offense. So you're going to have a clash there with the secondary from Kentucky and the offensive passing attack from Texas. And I'm really interested to see how Quinn Ewers fares this week. will he just absolutely take the top off and just have one of those games? Or is it going to be like it has been, and with Texas starting off slow the last couple of weeks? Another thing for Texas is I think their ground game is going to be key this week is can they establish the ground game, get the running attack involved against Kentucky, and then make those big plays downfield?
Yeah, this is a tough one to look at. Uh, you made great points, things that I was fixing to say about how Kentucky is really bowed up in these top 10 matchups with Tennessee and Georgia and Ole Miss actually beating Ole Miss on the road. Georgia lost 12-13 at home and then was neck and neck with Tennessee, and Tennessee, was able to pull away and win by 10, but a very good showing for a Kentucky team. Um, I could see this one going any way you wanted to tell me it went. If I did not watch this football game and I picked up a paper or got on social media and I saw the score on Saturday, I really don't think that there's any score that would surprise me. Um,
Yep.
just by looking at it, I think Texas handles their business. But we have seen Kentucky rise up in these games, and maybe Kentucky can muddy it up and keep this thing close or potentially pull an upset. Who's to say that Texas is not looking ahead to that
To
Texas
Texas
A&M
A&M.
matchup next week? I mean, you look at us in the state of Alabama right now. People are already talking about the Iron Bowl.
Iron
People are already
Bowl.
making Iron Bowl preparations. You've got rivalry weekend next weekend. A lot of people are kind of shifting their focus to that. Um, there's going to be a lot of big money boosters in Texas that's already making comments about beating Texas A&M. I mean, there's a lot of hatred there. So there's really nothing that would happen. Uh, Whenever I look at this, I just look at players. Texas has got the best roster. They're playing at home.
Talent.
Quinn Ewers, yes, he's been up. Yes, he's been down. But Isaiah Bond came back last week. He's been a little bit banged up. They've got good receivers. Their defense is playing lights out. I just I like Kentucky to maybe keep it close early, but I just don't think they have enough offense. 38-10 Texas.
Yeah, and like you said, you can look at this score and it could either be 52-7 Texas, or you can look at it and Kentucky pull an upset and it be 21-17 or something like that. But
Absolutely.
I think that maybe Coach Stoops has enough pride in this program, and maybe he has enough guys that are going to take pride in this week to play the next game, to play the next play. I think they do muddy it up, but I think Texas wins. I think it's going to be 27-17 Texas. Uh, so with that, we're going to do a quick prediction here for Wofford at South Carolina, 3 p.m. kick. Go ahead. You lead off on this one. Just something quick.
Yeah. South Carolina, Wofford has no business hanging around. Um, Wofford's 5-6. As a FCS, I'm an old school person. It'll always be Division two to me, but FCS, they're 5-6, so they don't even have a winning record at that level. South Carolina's got it going right now. If South Carolina were to make it into the 12-team playoff, I think they are a team with what they can do with their defensive line, the way Rocket Sanders has come on running the ball, and the way Lenora Sellers continues to improve in the passing game, and we know he can make plays with his legs. They're a team that nobody would want to play right now. I don't think anybody would want to face them in the playoffs. South Carolina, 56-7.
Yeah, like you said, they got a losing records, and if I'm reading correctly, points per game for Wofford is only 4.6 points per game this season. So yeah, no business hanging around with South Carolina. Lenora Sellers has just continued to just excel and get better week in and week out. I think Kennard and Stewart on that defensive line, they probably have the best defensive line other than Ole Miss in the country. They're probably going to combine for like 10 tackles and 3 sacks this week. I'm going 47-6 South Carolina. Next on the Mafia matchup list, we have Mizzou coming into town for Mississippi State. 3:15 kick. Mizzou coming in with a 7-3 record. Mississippi State sitting there, dead last in the SEC, 2-8, 0-6 in the conference. Both teams are on a one-loss losing streak. Yeah, I think I have to go Mizzou in this one, all the way around. What you think?
You know, there has been times when you look at Mississippi State and you start thinking, okay, it looks like they're getting somewhere. Van Buren, the quarterback, the young quarterback, he seems to be coming on. Uh, at times you look at what Jeff Lebby is doing with the offense and you think, okay, are they ready to take that next step? Are they ready to pull off one of these close games that they've been in and actually pull it off and get the win? Uh, Played Tennessee close for a while. Tennessee pulled away at the end. Of course, Arkansas really put it on them, but they were right there neck and neck with Texas A&M. They put up 31 points on Georgia. They
Hmm.
really, really muddied it up with Texas. Texas was able to score a couple late touchdowns, 35-13. It looks worse than it really was. But then you go back to earlier in the season, and Toledo beats them 41-17 on their home field. So again,
Hmm.
you kind of don't know what you're getting with the first year head coach. The one thing that kind of gets to me is the line is Missouri by 8. You go back to
Yeah.
last week, and you and I had a conversation about Vegas and the lines. Um, you know, BYU was only favored by a couple of points over Kansas. Uh, Florida was only a 3 or 4 point underdog to LSU, and we saw what happened. Um, Georgia was favored by 9 over Tennessee. So anytime I start looking at these lines and something just doesn't seem right, it just kind of makes me think, what does Vegas know that we don't? I would think Missouri would be a little bit more of a favorite than that. But I'm like you, I have to take Missouri in this, especially if Brady Cook is back and he's healthy. He looked pretty good last week. They almost beat South Carolina. But one thing to look at in this game, up until last week, I throw up the air quotes, technically you could still say that Missouri was in, a hunt for the SEC. You could say they were in a hunt for a wild card playoff spot with only 2 losses. Now that they've got that third loss and they're, barely ranked in the top 25, do they pack it in? Does Luther Burden start worrying more about his draft stock? Are we worried about the combines and things like that and trying to stay healthy for it? Is Mississippi State going to get Missouri's best game here? But I've seen nothing from Mississippi State up to this point that can make me pick them. I will say 31-21 Mizzou.
Yeah, and like we were talking about, just now, I nothing that Mississippi State has done this year would lead me to pick them. I think that what this game boils down to is that Missouri's offense makes plays. They stay on the field. They hold time of possession. I believe their starting running back is almost back full healthy, and Brady Cook should be back healthy. I don't think that Mississippi State's defense will be able to stop Brady Cook and the starting running back, especially if they're extending plays. They've got a 45.5% third down conversion rate, which is pretty decent. Yeah, I've got to go Mississippi. I mean, I got to go Missouri, 35-14. All right. Next Mafia matchup for the people. Big one on the list right here. Big one. Huge one this week. Not just because it's Auburn and Texas A&M, but yes, just because it's Auburn and Texas A&M. 6:30 p.m. kick. Texas A&M coming into Jordan-Hare, into dangerous territory. Lead us off, Randy from Mobile.
Yeah, I like what you did there with the little subtle Jordan-Hare, and giving the Auburn Stadium the respect that it deserves. It is a very very tough to play place to play. I know they're very specific about the pronunciation of that. But in all seriousness, this is the ultimate trap game for Texas A&M. I hear a lot of people just completely bash Auburn and talk about how terrible they are, and while I would say that is extremely false. I would say Auburn's not terrible. They're just having a terrible season. When you look at their record right now, they very, very easily could be vying for a playoff spot right now. When you look at the amount of close losses that they've had, the only game that I look at for Auburn where I say, you know what, they deserve to lose that, they really were in that and had no shot, would probably be against Georgia. Georgia kind of
Yeah.
controlled that. Um, but you look at losing DeKalb by 7 with all the turnovers, Arkansas by 10 with all the turnovers. Arkansas was able to score late, put that one away. Oklahoma by 4, Missouri by 4, Vanderbilt by 10. The one thing that gets me is it just seems like Hugh Freeze has not rode Jarquez Hunter like he should.
And that's one thing I
You
wanted
got
to
a
touch
guy, for
on.
instance, against Kentucky, who on 23 carries puts up 278 yards, and then the very next week against Vanderbilt, he gets the ball 12 times, and only two of those carries are in the second half. It just doesn't make much sense to me. Um, but when you look at Texas A&M and you look at them at home versus on the road, they seem to struggle a little bit on the road.
Yep.
And I'm really basing that off of their last road game at South Carolina, when South Carolina was just able to control the game, especially in the second half, and really cram it down their throat with Rocket Sanders. They're another one on the road at Mississippi State. They only won by 10. They let Mississippi State hang around. So I do think they're a little bit different team on the road. And Jordan Hare Stadium is a very, very tough place to play. This is Auburn's last home game for the year. This is going to be senior night for them. This is the last time that fans are going to see them play at home. Last time many of these guys are going to play on their home field. I do think that Auburn rallies the troops, and I think Auburn gets this win. Um, I'm not very confident in this one. I do think this is a coin flip, and based on what we've seen from Auburn, there is the potential for a 3 or 4 turnover game and them to lose by 10, 14 points. But they seem to have righted the ship in that area. They're not turning the ball over in a large amount like they were earlier in the season. I think Auburn kind of runs the ball, keeps this thing low scoring, and they end up getting the win 24-20.
You made great points that I was going to touch on. We're talking about an Auburn team that could be 8-2 right now, 7-3, 8-2, that threw away the Oklahoma and Missouri game, had the lead late in those games. All they had to do was get a couple of first downs, and extend drives. And this is because of play calling. This is because of coaching. Auburn has a top 25 talent roster. Looking at it right now, that they have a top 25 talent roster. And this is, like you said, is Hugh Freeze going to get out of his set ways and do the things that he needs to do to win this game? First and foremost, Texas A&M is playing Texas. No, wait, I'm just kidding. They're playing Auburn. And if you don't understand, I'm making a subtle jab at Mike Elko in his press conference earlier this week. I'm like you. I think Texas A&M is looking ahead for Texas. I really just think that they have got it in their minds that they're just going to go in and beat Auburn. But take a look at that line. The line is set at what, 10, 7, 5? No, it's set at 2.5. So Vegas odds are telling you right there something's going to be going down. I think that this is going to be a big test for Marcel Reed, especially with Le'Veon Moss being out. I think he's going to put a lot of pressure on himself to try and make plays with his legs. Auburn defense, it matches up pretty well with Texas A&M's offense. Texas A&M is going to have to be able to run the ball, and Auburn is top 15 in the FBS in the run stop. So I think that Auburn and Hugh Freeze need that one signature win for this year. And I think that this is going to be it. Like you said, it being senior night, it being the last home game, it being a night game of all games, this one being a night game, it's going to lean in Auburn's favor.
Yeah, and whenever you look at Texas A&M, you go back to the LSU game when when Marcel Reed came in the second half and they threw 2 passes. You're not going to do that against Auburn. You're not going to sit here and throw 2 or 3 passes per half. You're not just going to cram the ball down their throat. Their defense is too good, too proud for that. But here is Auburn's season in a nutshell. Okay, offensively, Auburn averages 428.5 yards per game. More impressively, 6.7 yards per play.
Per carry.
Per play. They're at almost 7 yards per play. Here's the entire season in a nutshell. They've turned the ball over 19 times and only forced 8 turnovers.
Yep.
That's why they're sitting here at 4-6 and fighting for their bowl lives. So if you look at it, you're kind of thinking, hey, our defense is due to have a game where we win the turnover battle by 2 or 3. Texas A&M in this environment, like you say, I just think Auburn gets this done this week.
Yeah, and I think the keys for Auburn this week is to force Marcel to throw the ball. You got to force him to use his arm, and he will create stupid turnovers. And all Auburn has to do is win the turnover battle. They've got a terrible turnover margin. just run Jarquez Hunter. Utilize your best player. Even if they're
Yes,
stopping the run, utilize them out in the passing game. I mean, he is your
yes.
best player. And I think if they do that, they win. And I'm calling for it close. Auburn wins 27-20. So with that, we move on quickly to our next Mafia matchup, Vandy at LSU. Going to only spend a few seconds on this one.
This is one for me, a lot like that Texas Kentucky game. There's really not much that I would see on Sunday if I didn't watch this game that would surprise me. LSU just seems to be in just absolute self-destruction mode right now with the things that's happened the last couple of weeks. If you follow recruiting, I don't know how many people do closely, but the number one quarterback in the country, Bryce Underwood, was committed to them. He's decommitted this week. There's rumors that other 4 and 5 stars from their recruiting class could be decommitting. Things look very, very bleak for Brian Kelly right now. He needs something to stop the bleeding. So does he rally the troops and LSU pick up a much needed win over a very good Vanderbilt, one of the better Vanderbilt teams that we have seen in a long time? Or does the Diego Pavia magic continue to roll in this one? I really think with their scheme, I like Vanderbilt in this matchup. In a close one, I just think they'll be able to kind of control the clock. LSU's run defense is not very great. We've seen that in the last 2 weeks with the plays that Milroe and Lagway have made against their defense. And Vanderbilt's defense is decent, but LSU's offense is just struggling. And in Brian Kelly, one of his press conferences earlier in the week, he made the comment about how Garrett Nussmeier was coming off of the field and pretty much telling him, that I'm being conservative because I've been turning the ball over so much that I don't want to make mistakes. That's just a bad recipe for a quarterback. You don't want a quarterback to have the mentality that they're kind of holding back or second guessing everything because they're afraid of making mistakes. And I think that shows with the amount of points that LSU has, I guess you'd say, not been scoring the last few weeks because they're not putting up points. I think Vanderbilt gets it done. Like Vanderbilt 24-17 in this one.
Yeah, I'm like you. I think that LSU is in panic mode, and I don't think it's going to get any better. I'm not going to say that that Brian Kelly has lost that locker room, but ever since Alabama stepped off the field after the bruising that they gave to LSU, it just seems like the morale of the team is just kind of, oh, well, we lost our shot at the playoff, there's nothing really to play for anymore, and it just seems like the morale of the team has gone down. And like you said with DJ Lagway and Milroe, I think this is a matchup that Pavia likes. I think that their rush defense is not that great for LSU. Like their secondary and stuff and coverage is good, but their rushing defense hasn't been all that stellar. And another thing that I would like to see is Vanderbilt's defensive line, earlier on in the year was forcing sacks. I'm interested to see how the trench battle is going to go down because LSU has only given up, I want to say, well, after this last week with Florida, they
had given up 6 sacks going into this game and gave up about that against Florida. So again, the last 2 weeks, their offensive line is really, and that's the telltale sign when the strength of their team, up to this point, when the strength of your team has completely lost its mojo, completely lost its strength, that's kind of a telltale sign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you said, I think I've got to lean towards Vanderbilt. Earlier on in the year, their defensive line caused havoc. LSU has been without their starting, I believe it's their right guard ever since the Alabama game, and it shows.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give the nod to Vanderbilt, and it's going to be, low scoring. Vanderbilt's going to control the clock. They're going to hold the ball. They're going to lengthen drives out. I think I'm going to go 24-21 Vanderbilt.
Yep, this is another one of those deals to where Vanderbilt is coming off of a bye week to where the last 2 weeks have been an emotional roller coaster for LSU. Not only are they looking at recruits decommitting, Brian Kelly having to answer questions about his quarterback, pressing and playing conservative. But he's also had some questions brought up in his press conferences this week about play calling. Brian Kelly used to call his own plays whenever he was at Central Michigan and at times at Notre Dame. Since he's been at LSU, he's kind of relinquished those duties. And he was kind of asked this week, how much are you involved? And he's having to answer those questions. Anytime you've got kind of an offensive minded coach having to answer questions and things like that, it just seems like it's a distraction. I just think Vanderbilt coming off of a bye with LSU coming off what they've had the last 2 weeks. I'm with you. I like Vanderbilt.
Yeah. And so with that, each week we're going to do like we did, quick rundowns for all of your SEC games. And then for the very last game, no matter what time, no matter what channel it airs on, we're going to bring up the Mafia matchup of the week. And it just so happens that the best game this week happens to be Alabama at Oklahoma. And so with that, this is going to be our Mafia matchup, our very first Mafia matchup of the week. 6:30 kick, night game, ABC. Alabama coming to this game off of a win over Mercer. Alabama is sitting at, what are we, 9-2? No, 8-2.
8-2.
8-2. Oklahoma's 5-5. Scares me. Us being Bama fans, it's one of those things to where, like Florida, fighting for bowl eligibility. Maybe you can rally the troops for that, have something to fight for, a common goal to reach. Both these teams match up very, very well together. Bama's offense is averaging 39.5 points per game. Oklahoma's defense is only giving up 21.9 points per game. I think that for this game, Bama has to protect the ball in every scenario. Now, with that being said, on the flip side, this is going to be a defensive battle. Oklahoma's offense, as we know, has not been that great. And so this will be a defensive test for both teams.
Yeah, Oklahoma's pretty banged up. Something that's kind of ironic, and once again, let's beat the chest of the SEC right here. You're hearing about three teams right now in the group of five getting that kind of at-large conference championship bid. You're hearing about Boise State. Of course, you're hearing about Army. Army's got Notre Dame this week. Can Army pull the big upset? And another team that you're hearing about that is really getting a lot of momentum is Tulane. Tulane and Army have actually, punched their tickets to the AAC championship game. Tulane is able to win out, and Boise stumbles down the stretch. Maybe Tulane jumps in there and gets that bid. They're ranked 20th right now. They lost by 2 touchdowns to Oklahoma. They lost by 2 touchdowns to a 5-5 Oklahoma team. And here we are talking about teams that are hot right now, potentially making playoff bids, and they're losing to 5-5 teams, in the SEC. So I said that just to say, Oklahoma is capable. They do have a good roster. I do think that they have also been the benefit of some pretty poor coaching. The loss to Missouri was just heartbreaking. If you watch football and you saw how that ended, with so many touchdowns scored in the last couple of minutes. Oklahoma's offense has been struggling this season. The game's tied 23-23. There's really been some shocking things that have gone down in the last couple of minutes. Play for overtime at that point. Your field goal kicker is not even great. If you do get into field goal range, it's probably going to be a long field goal to try to win the game. They end up getting, sacked, strip. Missouri picks the ball up, scores, wins the game. So there's some of those crazy games that Oklahoma's been on the wrong side of. Like you said, this one, as an Alabama fan, does worry me. Their defense is very solid. They have the number 2 rushing efficiency defense. And
Yes.
the key to beating Alabama is to slow Jalen Milroe's legs down. Tennessee did the best job of that and held Alabama to 17 points. LSU did a terrible job of that, and Alabama truthfully probably could have scored 60 if they wanted to in that game. So what will Oklahoma be able to do? Now, the kind of comparable team that we've seen go in here and play them was South Carolina. But South Carolina's defense just absolutely wreaked havoc on them early, forced several turnovers, and jumped on them early. So one thing about that is the Alabama defense has done a great job of forcing turnovers. So
Mm-hmm.
so I'm with you. The 13.5 point spread, I'm concerned about that one on the road in an SEC environment.
Yeah. So I guess kind of to flip that, some positives for Alabama. Yes, they're strong in the run defense. Yes, they are capable to stop a mobile quarterback. Um, their offensive line has given up 41 sacks. That is a concern for Oklahoma. I think that the trench battle is going to be huge for our defensive line and our linebackers this week. But we've got Jahad Campbell playing like a absolute madman, and Kane Womack has done a great job this season of adapting to quote unquote the SEC standards. Um, and the 41 sacks is concerning for them. I think that another stat that you kind of have to look at for offense is they've given up 40 plus what we call uh, explosive plays, 20 plus yard plays. They've given up over 40 of those, and Bama has 62 total for the season. So at 20 plus yards, they have 34 passes of going over 20 plus yards. They have 17 passes going 30 plus yards, and they have 8 passes going 40 plus yards. They are 97th in the FBS for explosive plays in their secondary. So I think that other than protecting the ball and sort of maybe establishing the run game, I think they need to lean on play action more this week. We haven't seen the big plays come from Alabama, since the start of the season. And I think this is a game for them that they can, establish a run game, get those linebackers' eyes into the backfield, and then take Justice Haynes and do a fake handoff and maybe hit Ryan Williams across the middle. I think you're going to see more play action and Bama leaning on play action, and not to mention special teams is going to be huge this week for Alabama. If you can flip field position and force Oklahoma to drive the length of the field, I think that our defense is going to create turnovers. It's not a matter of if, it's when with this defense. If they are playing on the level that they are capable of, that we have seen in the past couple of weeks, and so those are the keys for Alabama that they need to win this ball game.
Yeah, there's no doubt a couple stats that I'm sitting here looking at that are kind of alarming. If I'm an Oklahoma fan, per reception, per reception, so per completed pass, teams are averaging 12 yards per reception. That's really
Mm-hmm.
good. Um, Oklahoma's forced 17 turnovers, only 6 interceptions. So their secondary has struggled. Now on the flip side of that, they have forced 11 fumbles. So they seem to be doing a pretty good job of getting the ball knocked out. But offensively, per game, they are averaging 327 yards per game.
Mm-hmm.
That's very bad in the SEC. I mean, they're averaging 4 yards per play. Um, and I think for Oklahoma, it's easy to take to take the low road and hit them with a low blow and say, yeah, we knew they were going to struggle coming into the SEC. It's an SEC grind, but they have been decimated by injuries.
Injuries.
I mean, I heard this week that for the Alabama game, this will be their 11th game, and this will be their 10th different starting combination of offensive linemen. It's
Wow.
very, very hard to be good offensively when you're just playing musical chairs with your offensive linemen like that. Assuming Alabama goes in here, takes care of business, and plays um, a pretty clean football game, I will pick them to get the win. But I don't know about the 13.5, 14-point spread. I'm going to say Alabama 27-17, just under the spread.
I think that if Alabama goes in and they take care of business, as you say, they protect the ball, we win the turnover battle, we force them to drive the length of the field, um, and we quote unquote establish a run game to where they're trying to contain Milrow, they're trying to contain Justice Haynes, and we can get those linebackers and safeties down in the box and hit them deep. Maybe even we do run on them. I think that I think we do cover that spread, and I'm going 31-17, Alabama. And so with that,
Real
We will
quick, let me
bring
throw this
you.
out there. I don't
Yes.
want anybody to feel like they were left out. Real quick, Tyler. I just got to noticing our mistake, and we'll just throw a quick score prediction in there. One game we did miss was Arkansas and La Tech. It's another one of those games to where Arkansas really isn't playing anybody um, big. It's not a big key matchup. Don't want to leave anybody out. I think this is a big win for Arkansas. This is a chance for them to get to bowl eligibility. The spread on this game is 22. I like Arkansas to roll in this one. I like them to put things together, get a win, get to bowl eligibility, and ride a little bit of momentum going into the last week of the season. I'm going to say Arkansas 45-20.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Taylor Green against you said Louisiana Tech.
Yep, La Tech's 4-6. Whenever you
Yeah.
look at their schedule, they've struggled against any of the Power Five teams. I mean, they were beat earlier in the year by North Carolina State, and we know they're not very good.
Yeah, like we were talking about with Tulane earlier, G5 to P5 is extremely different level of play. I think that Taylor Green, has a game in this one, utilizing his legs, and I think they're going to cover that spread. And like you said, they roll that. I think it's going to be like probably 35-3 Arkansas. Yeah, that covers the spread, right? 35-3.
Yep.
Okay. All right. And with that, we shall bring you the SEC Mafia studs of the week. Week in and week out, we are going to predict the players that we think are going to have breakout games or they're just going to be an absolute stud. And so without further ado, I'm going to allow Randy from Mobile to be the very first member as a co-host of SEC Mafia to predict his studs of the week. One offense and one defense.
Yeah, and something else too. This been a new podcast. Just as evident with the Arkansas La Tech, we're going to kind of work through the kinks on this. But something we want to do is we want to be interactive. We're
Yes.
not necessarily doing this show trying to become the next big hit or anything like that. We just like to talk football. We like to hear what other people have got to say. So we want to be interactive on that. We threw up the Twitter and Facebook handles earlier on our social media pages. We're going to list all these games. Um, and comment under that and give your score prediction. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave your comment, leave your score prediction in the comments. We're going to go through the social media and the YouTube. Whenever we break the game down next week in the next podcast, whoever gets the closest score, we're going to shout you out and give you some credit, for getting the closest score prediction, and see how you do stacked up against us. For the studs of the week, leave in the comments who you think your offensive and defensive stud of the week is going to be. For me, I'm looking at my SEC offensive stud of the week as being Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. We talked about the explosiveness of their offense. Trey Harris is coming back this week. I absolutely just think they go into Florida, they get a statement win, and their offense just rose. Again, when you look at what Texas was able to do to their secondary and put up a lot of points, I think Ole Miss is actually better than Texas offensively. Defensively, for my SEC stud of the week, I'm going with Jahad Campbell here. Whenever I look at Jahad Campbell and the stats that he's got for the season, he is on an absolute tear right now. He leads the team with 84 tackles. He's averaging over 8 tackles per game, 6 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, an interception on the season. I think he has a big game. I think Oklahoma will try to run the ball and kind of grind it out and slow it out. This gives him another opportunity to have double-digit tackles. And so I'm going Jahad Campbell, my defensive stud of the week.
Nice. So for my offensive stud of the week, I went with Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. He's the leading rusher in the SEC, got 27 touchdowns. He's well over 1,000 yards rushing, but I know he leads in yards rushing in the SEC. And with them taking on UTEP, I think that they will utilize him in the ground game more just to try to give Nico a little rest. Like you said, they could throw in some wrinkles, try to hit some deep balls, but ultimately I think that they're going to ground and pound this one out, especially with their, looking towards the future a little bit. I'm not going to say they're overlooking UTEP, but, as coaches looking towards the future with how banged up Nico has gotten. I took Dylan Sampson, and then for my defensive one, it's an Ole Miss player. I'm doing Walter Nolan in that defensive line. Uh, Practically almost the whole defensive line is going to be
Yeah,
my
you could choose
stud.
any one of them.
I mean, you could. Yeah, I mean, even in the linebacker position, you could do Suntarine Perkins, who leads the team in tackles. But I think that Walter Nolan's going to have a breakout game. He'll probably have a couple of sacks on DJ Lagway this week, and I just think that Ole Miss defense rolls over that Florida offense this week.
It's a common theme in the SEC. You've always heard um, about how football is a line of scrimmage game, and so many of these teams they're likely just a carbon copy of one another. So many of these teams just have great front sevens, and then the talking heads will sit back and say, "But you can make some plays against them in the passing game. You can make some plays against." Well, that's because you can't run on these teams. I mean, so many of these SEC defenses have great front sevens. They stop the run really, really well. And Ole Miss does that just as good as anybody. And like you said, you could have chose any one of their defensive linemen.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer that the game of football is won and lost based in the trenches. If you get a run game established with your offensive line and you're running over a team, you're making your running back look good that way. And shout out to all the guys in the trenches, OLDL. Football in general is a trench sport. If you don't have guys to protect your quarterback and you don't have a pocket presence, you're going to allow your quarterback to get sacked and you won't have a passing game. So, like
Absolutely.
you said, there's carbon copies of so much, and it seems like every SEC team has dudes on defensive line, dudes on offensive line, and I just think that games are won and lost in the trench battle. Each week in and week out. Any final thoughts, Randy from Mobile?
Just excited for another weekend of college football. The playoff picture really begins to take shape. We see is Indiana. I know it's not SEC, but we see is Indiana a contender? Are they a pretender? Does Army have any shot against Notre Dame? I'd say no. And then the SEC race begins to shape up. My final thought's going to be this: we're looking like we're getting toward a logjam to see who goes to Atlanta. I mean, there's a potential for 7 teams possibly to finish 6-2 in conference. It seems right now that the keys to the ignition to get to Atlanta, assuming the favorites win out, go through Missouri. Mm-hmm. If Missouri wins one of its last 2 games, you actually gave the stats earlier about whenever you were talking about strength of schedule, about how Alabama's opponents have over a 50% win percentage. Alabama currently has the tiebreaker with any of the other teams that could finish with 2 losses as far as going to Atlanta. They hold that tiebreaker. And if Missouri wins one of their last 2 games, then assuming Alabama wins its last 2 games, it's more than likely going to be going to Atlanta playing the winner of Texas A&M. So let's kind of keep an eye on Missouri as this SEC race continues to shape out. And see, 2 weeks from now, who we're talking about being in the SEC championship game.
Yep. Absolutely. That's kind of my final thoughts. Is just excited for another weekend of college football. That's the whole reason that we're starting this podcast is because, we're all the time talking football, and we were like, well, why don't we just start a podcast and get everybody else involved? And for those of you that may not be familiar with college football, y'all can hop on in and, hopefully we give some wise words of wisdom week in, week out. But I mean, we're just 2 guys who just, love the game of football and want to talk about it and involve everybody with our show, with our podcast week in and week out. And we want to be interactive with y'all. And just excited to get it rolling and get it started. This is our pilot SEC Mafia football podcast. And I will throw our tags up on the screen one more time. We have an X, we have a Facebook. Give us a like, give us a follow. After today, we're going to have a YouTube channel. Like and subscribe. That way you can get notifications week in and week out for when our podcast drop. Our podcast will more than likely be dropping every Tuesday morning. We just appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate you guys listening. Anything else?
Yeah, again, give us your SEC studs of the week predictions. Give us your game predictions. We're gonna shout you guys out. On the show next week. Tuesday, whenever the show hits, we'll recap these games and then break down the upcoming games. So we want to shout you guys out. Thanks again for watching. Look forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Randy from Mobile, thanks for having you as a co-host. We will be back next week with more SEC drama. SEC Mafia, we are checking out.